The mechanics of the game are actually really interesting. It plays a lot like a war game known as War Machine, with some various differences. Um, you have alternating turns, which basically I move one model or collection of models who have a special ability to move together and act together, and then you move yours, like your one model, and then I move my one model and you move yours. Um, it works out pretty well, and there's a lot of strategy in going first, trying to go second, making sure that you set your opponent up for stuff, making sure that you always have something to back up in case shit hits the fan. Um, it also does not use dice, which is a pretty interesting thing for a war game to not use dice at all. Um, but this uses cards. They actually have their own set of cards, but you can actually play with just a simple set of playing cards. They have a conversion in the back because all it is really is, 52 cards, jokers included. Instead of having face cards, you have 11, 12, and 13, and the suits are just a different color. But it helps out a lot. And basically, you do special stuff with if you can get a high enough card and a certain suit of card. You can usually do something really cool and special. Like most of the guild have critical strike, which is for every ram in their attack, which you flip a card and one of the suits is a ram now. You do an extra point of damage, and people can get pretty high with that. It can go up to like 3 extra damage, which is really cool. Um, each player or each model actually is its own individual, and it feels very much like an individual. Everyone gets some rank and file troops, but even your rank and file troops feel like they're individual, which kind of makes it a little hard to get into bigger games starting up. I found that I like to play games around the 35 point marker um, because you don't really have to worry about there being so much stuff out there that you're just going to get lost in it, which was an issue that I thought I would have, but it turns out it works out fairly well. The game is set up so it's only 6 turns. After everyone's activated pretty much 6 times, the game usually ends. It can go longer, but it's like a random chance, and it's a very high random chance. You have to flip a 10 or higher, and then on the next turn an 11 or higher, and so on and so forth. And basically, the game works off of victory points. Unlike most games, which is, well, we're just trying to kill each other and these victory conditions are secondary, this is very much the victory conditions are primary. Um, Killing off your opponent may not be the way to win. Actually, I've had a game where someone killed off my master before they delivered a message to him and basically could not win the game at that point. Um, and for the most part, it is a lot of fun. You have to think very hard on building your force. You have to think of what your opponent has access to, and what you have access to. The game also has random, at the end of every turn, a random event will happen, which usually is very influential into the game. For instance, you can have the lights go out, and suddenly you can only see about 20 feet ahead of you. In the game, you can only see about 8 inches, which when you're fighting on a 3 by 3 board means that you're going to have to get very close in and usually have to play very dueling around each other if that ever happens. There's been times where it's like something will come up that will only help one of the players. For instance, a graveyard can come up, and if you're playing Resurrectionist, you now have the ability to make a whole bunch of corpse counters, which allow you to raise zombies. Um, there are a few negatives to the game. That I want to go into just so that you're aware of them before you move up. The game is very much an arms race. Once you get in, it doesn't cost at all to get in. It costs about $30, 30 to 40 bucks to have a starting set, which if you played any other war game, that is really good. And that is a force for about 20 to 25 points. And like I said, I play games of 35 points because I just find them a little more fun. But before 35 points, I play 25 points. But the thing with that is that if all you buy is a box set, then people are going to be able to counter what you play. Every master in this game has a foil pretty much in every other set. And if you only buy one master for a faction, you can be defeated pretty easy if anyone figures out what you're doing. Now, I think that's personally a little bit against the spirit of the game, but it is a marketing strategy that the game has implemented. Because I pretty much have every master except for one in Resurrectionist. And the only master I don't run does not run with anything in Resurrectionist, really. But the main reason I didn't pick her up was because my brother wanted to play her. And I wanted to make sure that we didn't have any real crossover between us. Um, Another thing that happens is that this game is very much a random game. You get the ability to control your fate, as it said, by you draw a hand at the start of each turn of about 6 or 7 cards, and for every time that you want to do something, you flip a card and try and get the right suit or a certain number, and you flip it off the top of your deck. And the reason why I say it's very random is that you can count cards in this game, but the main thing that you have to make sure of with this game is that you're properly shuffling your opponent's, pretty much yours, and you have to make sure your opponent's decks are properly shuffled. Otherwise, you'll clump up all of your high cards, and there's nothing worse in a game than just having a turn where your opponent didn't shuffle their deck very well, and they have all their face cards. Because pretty much that's a death sentence. It's very hard to recover from something like that happening. It's led to several arguments at our game store that this has happened. Um, this is not a very forgiving game. And what I mean by that is that if you mess up too much, it's very hard to recover. And sometimes, if you mess up at all, like if you just miss an attack, which is what your opponent's trying to make sure that you miss the attack, you can end up not being able to do anything else that turn. But the game is usually very supportive on the person that's doing actions usually going over the person that is having to respond to those actions. Um, and it's very much a get-in-your-face game. Ranged combat, however supported in certain factions, is hurt very much with the actual rules, with things like cover and line of sight and the shadow rules for buildings. If you're up on a building and you're outside an inch, basically you can't see down. If you're an inch away from the edge of a building, basically people can't see you very well and you can't see them very well. Trying to think what else. One thing that's a little upsetting for me personally with this game is that the distribution for it is very slow. And the reason of this is that this was a relatively small miniature game company who made a game basically just to sell the miniatures, and the game was a hit. And they are very much behind on a lot of stuff. For instance, I actually just got into a rather heated discussion with my friend Daniel Dorney about the stuff in the second book. They've released 3 books right now. The third book has been released, and we're waiting for it to come into the stores. Basically, they've released the third book, and stuff from the second book isn't even out yet. And there is a reason for it. They wanted to make sure that this stuff had better support with each other. But that being said, I really feel that they could have done singles for a lot of their miniatures. For instance, Resurrectionist and Arcanist have had pretty much our special forces, which was a big thing for the second book, just not come out yet. The rules are out for them, but this is a game that's constantly evolving and actually being eroded a lot. So a lot of the creatures, for instance, Resurrectionists get a rogue necromancy, and that creature has not come out yet, but it's heavily used in tournaments by both Arcanists and Resurrectionists, and I just find it very interesting that Arcanists and Resurrectionists have some models that just haven't come out yet that we really need. Um, but that being said, it's not a huge deal, and the stuff that's come out is very well done. The miniatures are some of the best I've seen. They paint up very well. The game has had some very interesting storyline events that have happened. We actually have stories with this game over events that have happened in the games, and like they were just things that have happened that are hilarious. Like for instance, there is Seamus, who's a resurrectionist outcast. And Seamus has what's called the copycat killer, which is just a midget who has his gun in his hat. And he basically has the most powerful ranged attack in the game. Well, there's a creature called a doppelganger who can copy your abilities or your weapons. And we had the doppelganger copy Seamus's gun and shoot the copycat killer and kill it. And that's always been one of those things that's been really funny that we've kind of talked about. And there have been other things that have happened like that. Um, but I want to wrap this up now. Basically, the game is a great game. It's very cheap to get into. The miniatures, for what they are relatively cheap as well. I highly suggest you get into it. It's a very fun game. You can try it out at Treefort Games. I very much would enjoy anyone coming up there to wanting to learn how to play. I would actually show you. I'm there on Thursdays and Sundays most of the time. So, that being said, I will talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.